It's a look at a different kind of Americana. It looks at it through this muddy housing development, through casinos and backroom card games and cruising parks and gay bars. So it's like an Americana seen through a queer lens. We always tried to shy away from iconic or sort of like really recognizable things. When they go on the date and go watch the atomic blast test, that was in a lounge in a bar and like a mid-century kind of thing, and instead we put it out in a parking lot. The visual effects team, the first time that came back, it was like this huge, beautiful explosion. And I said, guys, we have to put it like 50 miles away, otherwise the whole second half of the film would be everyone melting.
Daniel, this is your first feature directing effort in more than 20 years. So talk to us about coming back to directing a film, and with this story in particular, what drew you to this one to return to it?
I'd been doing a lot of work in series for years, which I found very fulfilling and exciting. And then Peter Spears, our producer, who's here with us tonight, approached me, and we decided that we wanted to try to find a film to make. And I was really interested in a particular kind of love story. And we passed books back and forth. Finally, Shannon Prufroll's book came our way, and we both fell in love with it, and were really compelled to make it. So, yeah, it was a bit like, I feel like I kind of took all of this great training that I had with a lot of incredible writers and showrunners and put it all to the test in this film.
It's so gorgeously done, and you're working, I think, in a lot of great American cinematic traditions. There's noir, there's melodrama. What were some of your reference points in taking this adaptation and very much making it your own?
I think we followed the novel. The novel's a very interior book, and Shannon is kind of drawing from a lot of queer literature. There's a bit of Gore Vidal, there's a bit of On the Road, there's a lot of things in a bit of noir. And the thing that we realized as we adapted it was that we had to give these people a voice. It's a very internal book. And so we had to give them a voice and dramatize everything. And that was our biggest challenge. And then all of the genres that she was like suggesting, I wanted to try to subvert them. There's dialogue that sounds like noir. There's the gambling trope, there's the love triangle, and I just tried to make them more accessible and not lean so much into the pastiche of like a 1950s film. We drew, rather than from films, we drew from documentary photography with the cinematographer as our inspiration.
And this was shot by Luc Montpellier, the great cinematographer of Women Talking, did such a beautiful job with it. Will, Sasha, before we talk about your characters, I'm just curious really what you thought of this story and the script when you first read it. What struck you about it? What made you want to be a part of it?
I knew you were going to look at me first.
Feels like Sasha has to go first.
I love Will Poulter, guys. I'm so sorry.
I love you.
Bryce wrote the most beautiful script. The story goes that I got sides for this film to audition, and I loved it, but I didn't know if I was the right person for it, and I didn't read the script because if I read the script, I thought, I'm gonna fall in love, and if I don't get this, I'm gonna be sad. So I kind of left it alone. I sent my tape, and then it came back, and I had a chemistry read with Daisy over Zoom, and I was like, okay, I have to read the script now. And then I fell in love with it, and I loved meeting Dan. We had coffee, and it was really sweet, and I just knew that I had to sign on to the project.
How about for you, Will?
Yeah, similar in the sense that I also fell in love with Bryce Cass's script, which I thought was such a beautiful adaptation of the book and such a wonderful, complex, well-balanced and sort of humanizing story. And then I was a fan of Dan's work as well, and knew kind of what a beautiful job he would do of bringing that to life. And that partnership between Bryce and Dan was sort of like too good to turn down. Some wonderful people already attached, and so it kind of became a very, very easy yes, you know, and feel very grateful to have a space in the film, honestly.
I'm curious, in terms of Julius and Muriel, to start, the connection between these characters, kind of as it is in the book, is so enigmatic and complicated and very gradually teased out. If you could maybe talk about how you drew that out and also how you cast these parts so beautifully with Jacob and Daisy and found that through them.
Yeah, honestly, it was the relationship between Muriel and Julius that made me want to adapt this, because I hadn't seen a love story like this before. You know, love story is only as good as the restraining forces that are keeping the people apart. And I feel like these two people come together, they immediately see each other. You think it's romantic, but then you start to realize that it has more dimension to it, and they really change the direction of each other's lives. I think she's fascinated and in love with the idea of his independence and freedom, and he really wants to belong somewhere, and he's trying to make a home with, you know, with Henry. So, you know, we talked a lot about how would we make it feel like they're thinking about each other and influencing each other when they really have very little screen time together. Right. So I just thought the idea of a love story between a gay man and a queer woman was very interesting. And so I hope that comes across. It's sort of like the underpinning of the piece. And they just had such great chemistry that I just had confidence in just, you know, watch them go.
Yeah. With these two characters who are sort of pulling Muriel in different directions, one of the really, I think, beautiful components of, again, both the book and the movie is that there's no antagonistic quality to either of them. There's a sadness at times, there's a sexiness. How did you want to figure them into the story and really keep them grounded as characters as opposed to plot devices?
I mean, I think one of the first things that Will and I talked about when we met was the idea of this very unique antagonist who's actually an upright guy and, you know, wants the best for everyone and really wants to make a family. If he has like a fatal flaw, it's that he doesn't, he sort of knows everyone's secret, but he's just so single-minded in what it is he wants to do. And it was really important to us, I think, that he had a dignity about him, you know, that he wasn't like behind the story all the time. I think if everyone has a secret in this film, then Lee's secret is that he knows everybody's secret, but he chooses not to act on it. And I thought that was a very unique antagonist. And the thing about Sandra that was so striking, and I feel like it's demonstrated so dramatized so great in the screenplay, is the idea that she's a woman who lives on her own. You know, and that's a very, you know, Muriel's sort of like all of her relationships are everything's in reaction to men, to Lee, to Julius, and then she meets this woman who lives down the road who lives without a man. And I thought, you know, when we met, you know, I was like, okay, I believe this, you know, I believe this. And they had this really intense dynamic together. So, yeah. That's kind of how we worked on those characters, or at least how we, you know, proceeded.
Sasha, you'd mentioned the very strong connection you very quickly felt to this character. What about her did you connect to, and what were you excited to play with her?
Well, she's a gay woman, you know, and I love that about her.
Yeah.
I think she's super strong. I find that she is fearless in a time that is scary, which I admire her, to be very frank with you. I you know, watching that scene, side note, going another way, watching that scene with Daisy and Kat, when they're in the bar, I was just sitting there and I was like, oh my God. Like my heart was just, you know, and so I think Sandra, I really just admire her so much for being so bold and so proud and so loving and forgiving all at once. I love those qualities about her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find that in this film, you have this kind of tapestry of queerness, and she really opens the movie up in a lot of ways because she does have this boldness, and our lead characters are obviously relatively, closeted, struggling with that, and to see her so bold, that there's a real energy that you come in with. I wonder if you can talk about just finding that energy in the movie.
Yeah. I mean, Dan was really lovely. I think working with Dan throughout this, he had a vision, and I think we both loved the character so deeply, and I felt her, I felt her confidence. I felt the way she walked into a room. When I read the script, I really felt like I knew her entirely. And that was a really beautiful thing. That is rare, I think. Sometimes when you're reading all these scripts, you're like, I really hope I understand this one. And I did. I mean, I read it and I just got her.
Will, how much did you get Lee when you first read the script?
It's really interesting. I was just latching onto a word you use, which is tapestry, which I think is such a great descriptor for this film, because there are so many kind of intertwining and often overlapping, narrative strands and experiences and perspectives. And what Bryce and I think Dan captured so brilliantly is the kind of textured nature of life, right? That it's not so singular and easily digestible. And, what was really interesting was to think about how Lee was somewhat separate from that, and as Dan touched upon, also kind of aware of that tapestry. And as you put so brilliantly, if he has a secret, it's that he's maybe a little bit more aware than he's ever going to kind of actually sort of publicly acknowledge. And I think he is aware, just by proxy to his brother being queer, of his privilege to an extent. But still, that scene that we have together at the house, you see how, in his straight male white privilege, he doesn't, you see his limitations. You see that he's still, a product of the time. And, Muriel has this wonderful curiosity, and I think she has kind of like wider and broader sort of parameters to her as a person and to her worldview, and at a certain point she kind of outgrows him, so we spoke about all of that, and as I say, I feel lucky to just have a kind of a space in the context of all that rich, beautiful tapestry that is this film.
I'm curious how you felt that Lee saw Muriel over the course of the movie, how that evolved. There's deep love there, and it gets a lot more painful as the story progresses. How did you play that?
It's interesting. I think that a lot of the things that Lee loves and admires about Muriel are things that he also knows he isn't capable of he knows he's not capable of kind of meeting her in the middle. He sort of admires her adventurousness, her curiosity, while simultaneously he's kind of asking her to fit within his plans and live a life that he knows won't ultimately satisfy those things in her that he admires. So it's true of life, right? It's complex. And he doesn't, frankly, have the kind of tools or the wherewithal to give her ultimately what she finds with you, and what also Julius unlocks in her, I think, to a degree. So that was just interesting, and again, there's nothing really that you can take at like face value or just for what it appears to be on the surface level with this film, which I love. It's highly dynamic and textured, and as an actor, that's what you love to do, right? Like, I'd never felt like we did a scene as an ensemble and it was like, oh yeah, there's a A to B here, and we'll just kind of knock it out. It was always informed by such amazing discussions. And that's the other thing I would say is, in preparation for this, Dan afforded us a really rare opportunity, on small budget films, which you shoot in a tight period of time. Like, you can't necessarily always afford rehearsal time, and you stipulated that we had these wonderful, lengthy, in-depth discussions around a table about every single aspect of our characters and their dynamic and relationship to each other, and that was just so amazing. It was like, it resembled more how I kind of assume plays and theatre to sort of go down, and it was great. I loved that.
I have to add to that just to make Dan feel wonderful. But I also just loved that so much. My character was informed by a playlist and so much music and photos of a book that I ended up buying and I have in my home and I constantly look at, and articles and videos that have informed me as a queer woman. You know, like it really opened up my life as well, having all these conversations with you, and I really thank you for that.
I also made them all dance and practice dancing.
Yeah,
so
we
they got to
danced
make
a lot.
fools of themselves in front of each other, which I think kind of bonded them a bit. There was a
lot of
dancing
dancing.
day where we had a choreographer come in and teach everybody.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
It's a great time.
Some people made fools of themselves more than others, but yes, it was fun. It was fun.
I think you feel all those details you're talking about in the performances and the texture of the movie. So, Daniel, with all that in mind, especially knowing that you are working in a period, and you'd mentioned earlier kind of wanting to avoid those period trappings, what about this period, and particularly queerness in this period, did you want to evoke within this sort of, Americana sort of sweep that you give it?
Yeah, to me, the thing that appeals to me about this is it's a look at a different kind of Americana. It looks at it through this muddy housing development, through casinos and backroom card games and cruising parks and gay bars. So it's like an Americana seen through a queer lens. That was really, that was really interesting to me. And we always tried to shy away from iconic or sort of like really recognizable things, like the atomic, when they go on the date and go watch the atomic, blast test, that was in a bar, like in a lounge in a bar, and like a mid-century kind of thing, and instead we put it out in a parking, in a parking lot. The visual effects team, the first time that came back, it was like this huge, beautiful explosion, and I said, guys, we have to put it like 50 miles away, otherwise the whole second half of the film would be everyone melting. So that's why they ended up like very small.
Well, we have to wrap. I wanted to ask you about generally wrangling horses, so maybe I can combine that into another question, just about the ending and the kind of note you wanted to end the movie on.
Yeah, the horses were, Julius brings this horse to her. He thinks that they built a ranch in California. They live in a ranch house. It's sort of a miss, but it's also a bit taunting, and the idea that this horse, there's a bit of magical realism. I mean, Muriel gets to meet Henry, they connect unknowingly, that they're both looking for the same person. And this horse has just been wandering around this unfinished housing development for, a couple months and finds its way back to Julius. There's a bit of magic to it. And, it's actually the way the novel ends. And it's very, it's very beautiful. And sadly, in the novel, when he goes back to the housing development, Sandra's house is gone. It's sort of been, emptied. So it's I don't know. I think it kind of it ends on a note of hope. It's we kept looking at it like, is this okay? Is this corny? Is this beautiful? Is this, it's like a very iconic trope of a Western. Mm-hmm. And he's riding towards Las Vegas to go back and find Henry and mess up his life again.
Western goes queer to the end. Well, we'd appreciate it if everyone could stay in their seats just while we make a quick exit. Thank you all so much, and thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.